So thanks everybody again for joining. This is a very timely webcast that we're working with today. Ironically enough, we did have a live event scheduled today and had to cancel it because everybody was freaking out, to put it mildly, about all the travel restrictions and the coronavirus travel bans and self-quarantining and whatnot. Those are all real concerns. And what we're hearing as well from a lot of our clients in the supply chain space is just how real these concerns are and how they're impacting their supply chains every day. So we thought it'd be a great opportunity to show how if you had a solution like IBP, specifically one running a supply optimizer, how you would actually go ahead and run those. So let's go ahead and get started. Kyle, you want to move to the next slide here to go through our agenda? There you go. All right, so here's what we got in store for everybody today. We'll go through a quick introduction of who we are, but mostly we're going to spend the time, maybe about 15 minutes or so, on IBP and how it would, why more specifically it would work in serious supply chain disruptions, such as in this case a pandemic. But I mean, these are becoming regular occurrences, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's tariffs, whether it's government sourcing issues, or just raw material issues. They're all becoming more and more common. And so how IBP would handle it is a very interesting topic, one that's always relevant and something that we'll end up showing today. Kyle will go through the demo of that, which will show through, here's what we look like. Much better looking in these pictures than we were if we would have used the webcam. So appreciate that. So my name is Mike Raftery. I'm the CEO of SEM Connections. We also have Christy Natick.
Hello, friends.
And Kyle Kelly.
Hello.
So we will be your hosts and your guides for the rest of the day. If you want to go to the next slide there, Kyle, jumping straight through. So just a little bit about who we are. SCM Connections, we specifically focus on IBP from a supply chain point of view. So we work in SAP platforms, specifically now the IBP platform. We've developed SAP Partner Qualified Package Solutions, which means it's a preset solution signed off on by SAP to shorten the development and configuration time. We love just solving supply chain problems, and that's hopefully going to show through today. But you'll see a lot of the process focus that we put in this package, and specifically how easy it is for supply chain processes to be modeled in a cloud platform like IBP. So again, we're easy to work with. We love just solving difficult problems like this, and hopefully that will shine through today. So now that that's over, we're going to pass it along to Christy Natick, who has a background very specifically in tune with the issues of today. So Christy, why don't you go ahead?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so what a week, huh? The news doesn't seem to be getting much better from a supply chain perspective. And you know, IBP has been a phenomenal solution. We typically demo it to show, you know, how do you minimize costs, how do you maximize profits, but you know, this scenario we're going to walk through today is just a little more, you know, not to be dramatic, but it is life and death. We're talking about personal protective apparel from the healthcare side. So according to Premier Inc., which is the largest healthcare group purchasing organization in the country, the U.S. typically buys about 22 million N95 masks, which are infection prevention, small particulate masks, not your ear loop masks or your isolation, none of that. So 22 million in a typical year. However, January saw a 400% spike. February saw a 585% spike. So levels of demand have risen to the point where we're guesstimating this year the demand is going to be about 56 million for masks. That's nearly 3 times the standard demand. So if you had to have an answer for your executive team today on how long it would take you to ramp up production, shift supply, move inventory to meet a 3-time demand for your products, could you answer that question for them in minutes?
And Christy, your background is a little bit more sensitive to this. Do you want to give your point of view on how you would have handled this?
So in my former life, I was a chief resource officer for one of the largest Catholic health systems in the country. So my teams were responsible for making sure there were masks, gloves, everything you need for any trauma, any procedure, anything that might come into your hospitals. They had to be there for the physicians and the clinicians. So I have been sending bagel baskets, cookie baskets, what have you, to my friends in healthcare because they are in an absolute panic. Right now, the distributors bringing supplies into hospitals are filling about 44% of orders for personal protective apparel. So that's, you're getting less than half of what you order on any given day.
Which means people order twice as much.
Right, exactly. It breeds all kinds of really terrible behavior. So this is, again, we're not talking about maximizing profits or finding the appropriate channel. This is big stuff. And Kyle is going to walk through today in the demo of how do you do that? How do you live in an IBP world where you can run what-if scenarios to determine the best solution to make sure that your customers have what they need to be safe and to save lives.
Perfect. So how does that, so hopefully that gives you some context about the amount of disruption. And we're seeing that, again, all elements of the industry. So as we go through the IBP platform, what makes that sort of uniquely able to tackle this kind of issue? So we see is it's a fully integrated platform. You can see sales and operations, inventory, demand, supply. The key part here is that bottom yellow bar. It doesn't look very exciting. What it really means is that all of these things, all of these elements, all these decision capabilities sit on a singular platform. So they all share data. They're all looking at the same product matrix. They're all looking at the same cost data. So you're solving these problems in an integrated fashion. And that really begins to unlock a lot of value when you go to things like an interconnected supply chain and seeing the ramifications of these decisions. So if you go to the next slide, Kyle, this is what we're going to walk through today, which is a lot of how IBP's decision making. You can see how the ripple effects occur up and down a supply chain. So customer demand, what does that do to transportation? What does that do to storage? What does that do to service? What does that do to procurement? What does it do to capacity? And then what sort of pressures do you put on your vendors? Those are all questions that you get during these scenarios. And rather than doing these calculations on the back of a napkin or gut instinct or a spreadsheet, we're going to show how IBP can provide those answers to you in a very succinct way. So if you go to the next slide there, how does it do that? One is the performance is sort of unparalleled in the industry, and that's due to SAP's HANA architecture. The end-to-end planning data model leverages that technology to make sure there is no friction between modules within IBP. Demand, supply, inventory, finance, transportation, all are looking at the same plan through the lens that they care about. If you care about storage capacity, somebody else cares about transportation capacity, another person cares about vendor material availability. You're all working off of the same singular plan, but you're tackling it from different areas. And that's really the key element. The user experience, you'll see, again, working with Excel makes it easy to understand and manipulate. We're going to show the planning algorithm for optimization. So it's going to respect the constraints that we put on it, even when those constraints are completely infeasible, to give you a best possible answer of a terrible situation. And then the simulations as well. And I think this one's a really key element to being able to answer these questions. So if you go to the next one, Kyle, you'll see the what if scenario capabilities here take all of those platform advantages and allow you to create side-by-side models comparing scenarios A, B, and C. So even when A, B, and C are all awful, you at least know the impact of each one and can make a decision with eyes wide open. And we're going to actually create scenarios in front of you to show you how that would actually work. So with that, when I say we, by the way, I'm talking about Kyle. Kyle is one of our analysts here at SCM Connections, and he's going to show you, highlighting some of the very specific modules in IBP here on the next slide. So Kyle, why don't you go ahead and show them what you're going to go through, paint the picture of the scenario they're going to watch, and then we'll go ahead and show you what it looks like in real time.
Perfect. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. All right. So today what we're going to look at is the SNOP and specifically the response and supply portion of IBP. So we're going to take a look at some of the consensus demand values that are coming in from your demand forecasting and see how that pairs up with the capabilities of your supply chain, especially in some of these rare circumstances that we're seeing right now with the coronavirus and the demand on PPE in particular. So in this live demo, what we're going to show is first the flexible planning network. Now, just for demonstration purposes, it might be on the more simplified route. We'll show you a depiction of it, but nonetheless, simple or complex, the way IBP is set up, it can handle it all. So we're going to show you an instance where we have redundant sourcing options. Some are more expensive than others. And then we're going to give you an idea of what happens, especially during the optimization runs, when we have a huge spike in demand, or let's say we have a coronavirus outbreak at one of our facilities and we have to shut the plant down for 5 weeks, all of which are actually looking more and more plausible, as the days kind of progress. Hopefully what we can get across to you in this kind of demo of IBP is some of the simulations that can happen in real time, how you can really look side-by-side comparison of maybe your baseline to some of these more drastic changes to your demand or your supply capacity. And then, based on kind of the functionality of IBP, you're then able to promote whatever you think is actually going to be the plan that you want to stick with, and then you can move on to later portions of your business process. So with that, I'll just quickly walk through a visual diagram of the supply network that we're going to demo today. So all of these are in this demo based in the US, but again, it doesn't matter. This is just the data. You could have these based all across the world. The only thing that would be any different would probably be the lead times. So in this instance, we have customers in the West, East, and Midwest portions of the United States, and they are serviced by distribution centers located in Seattle, Boston, and Detroit. Now, filling these distribution centers are 3 plants. One's based in Philadelphia, one is San Jose, and one is Chicago. Now, whereas the DCs can only distribute product to the customers in the respective areas, the plants are actually able to deliver the different products to any of the DCs. And this is kind of that redundant sourcing that we were talking about. Additionally, just for simplification purposes, we're looking at just showing one resource per plant. So we're considering one resource is capable of producing all the products at an individual plant. Okay. So just to get, again, one more visual of the scenarios that we're going to try to show you today. The first one is kind of what happens when there's a massive demand spike. So Christy already highlighted this, especially for the N95 respirator. There have been 400, 500 plus increases in demand over the past few weeks. So we're going to show you kind of an exaggerated portion of that for some of your face masks and N95 devices. And then we're also going to show you the second demo is not only do we have the demand and spike, but what happens if we have that spike in demand and one of our plants goes down. So again, you have an outbreak at one of the plants just for safety purposes, because again, what we're caring about is the individuals, not just the customers that are asking for the products, but also the people that are making the products. And it would behoove us to shut it down for 5 weeks to kind of restrict any of the spread of that virus, right? So that's what we're going to attempt to show you today. So maybe just bear with me for 1 second while I am going to switch over now to IBP itself.
It's kind of ironic that that child is in isolation on up here, Kyle. Self-isolation.
So we had a great question from one of our attendees asking what the percentage of face masks are made in the United States. The answer to that, unfortunately, is 0. There is a small percentage still made in Mexico, but the vast majority are made in APAC.
Yep. And again, for this demo, we have it demonstrated as, they're being produced at manufacturing plants in the east, west, and mid part of the United States. But again, that's just for the demo purpose. That could have very easily just been placed in, Beijing, Wuhan, or wherever it is. Again, it's just the data we're dumping into IBP itself. But for just the ease of demonstration, Mike and Christy, can you see my screen okay?
Oh yeah, we can see it just fine. Go ahead.
All right, great. Sorry, I got a message saying my connection was lost. So the first thing I'm going to do here is, for those that are uninitiated with IBP, it's the user interface is quite nice because it's in Excel, which I'm sure everyone is accustomed to using day in and day out. So it's just another add-in. You can see at the top of the ribbon here called IBP. You would log in, and then you have the general functionality, not only of IBP, but you can also maintain the native functionality of Excel, which is really nice. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to step you through what the baseline for this particular PPE manufacturer and distributor looks like. Okay? So what you're seeing on your screen here is the product demand for two product groups. And we have a high protection group and a standard protection group. And as you can see, it's a pretty steady stream of consensus demand that's coming in over the next 12, 15-week horizon. Right? And as you would assume, the standard protection has a higher amount of demand than does the higher protection, right? Makes sense. Usually you'd have less demand for those high protection devices. Now, just to kind of highlight some of the reporting capabilities of IBP, they're just built into the tool itself. Let's say you want to dig in just a little bit deeper and not just see this at the high product group level, but let's see what's actually comprised inside these groups themselves. So I can just do a quick right click here, and I'm going to add what's called an attribute. So this is just another piece of data that is associated with the product. So if I add the attribute here, it's going to give me the option based on how we have the master data set up, and we're going to add in the product description. And very quickly, you will see that high protection is comprised of face shields, hazmat bodysuits, that N95 respirator that we've been talking about, nitrile gloves, and then the standard are more of those standard things that you see every day, like the face masks, goggles, shoe covers, surgical gowns, etc. So this is just a nice kind of, it shows you how you can slice and dice very easily within IBP, simply based on how the master data is set up. All right, so now let's just kind of walk through again the baseline scenario where we're considering just standard demand, what we would normally see, not in the case of a pandemic like we're seeing now. So for this particular supply chain, we're going to look over at the capacity tab, where we're going to see those three resources and plants that we showed in the network diagram a little earlier. And what you'll notice just from the outset is that for the next so many weeks, you can see the network is already pretty constrained. We're reaching about max capacity for the next 6-7 weeks. But then further out in the horizon, you're going to notice that specifically for this kind of teal color, which corresponds to the 17 pack, which is our Chicago plant, it starts dropping down. And that is because the Chicago plant is the most expensive plant out of the three. So the nice piece about Optimizer is, depending on what setting you have, and we're at profit maximization, it's going to try to ensure that not only can we meet demand, but we're also doing it in a responsible, value-based way. So when it doesn't have to, it will not use the higher priced Chicago plant, and you can see that over here. Additionally, we can look and see what inventory is doing for this baseline as well. Now, inventory, as you know, you'll have your inventory targets, and then what Optimizer is going to consider is the projected stock based on your current position. So in the baseline for the normal demand, we're seeing that at the beginning, we're a little bit obviously under that projected stock or that inventory target for all of our DCs and our plants. But as we move further into the horizon and our resources are able to produce enough not only to meet that customer demand, but also to replenish those stocks, we can see that it raises up about in calendar week 18 is about when we start getting back to that target that we would like to see. Right? Okay, so now let's get into really the benefit of IBP here, which is that scenario planning that Mike talked about earlier. So we're going to go back to the product demand tab. And again, these tabs are just set up just because this is how I would like to view the data. You could very easily have multiple workbooks open with, it just really depends on how you like to work. And that's the flexibility and the beauty of IBP itself. So in this case, we were talking about what would happen if, for example, the N95 respirator all of a sudden saw a huge increase in demand, and what's going to happen if that's in the short term. So with IBP, it's pretty easy to start playing around with some of these figures. Because it is native Excel functionality, I can just say, well, what happens if I get 10 times the demand on that day? Right? Now, again, native Excel functionality, I can now drag this out over horizon. Now, in this case, I'm making updates to our base data set. And a lot of the times, just for business processes, that's not what you want to do. You kind of want to be able to compare your base to, some of these what if scenarios. So that's when we have what we call scenarios, where you can create, it's just kind of like a copy of your data set. And then you can start comparing what does my supply plan look like in those instances where I have a huge increase in demand. So to create a scenario, you just simply go up to the create button and you appropriately name it, and then you hit OK. You're also allowed to share these scenarios with different people in your working group. In my case, I'm just doing this on my own, so maybe I don't want anyone to see kind of what I'm playing with yet, but maybe at some point you think this might be a plausible idea, let me share it with some other people. So you can do that. Now, I already have this set up, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to refresh so we can start seeing the side-to-side comparison of the baseline to our increased demand. So I didn't save any of that data yet, and I'm going to go up and I'm going to edit this view. And editing the view just means I'm going to pull in another piece of data, and that piece of data is the new scenario. So here's my increased demand scenario. And when I pull it in, what you'll see is a new column that is going to now, for each of these key figures, it's going to show you what the consensus demand is for the increase demand scenario and our baseline scenario. So right off the bat, we just look at this N95 respirator, you're going to see we've got a big tick up in demand here in these next 5 weeks. Okay?
So Kyle, while you bring that up, can you also just kind of talk about how users might go about creating these, or sort of what the security impact or database impact would be of creating extra scenarios like this?
Yep, scenarios are pretty limited. The nice thing is that when you're creating the scenario off the baseline, it's not really duplicating a lot of the data. It's just keeping the new inputs for what you change. So in this case, my increased demand, all I'm really changing from the baseline is the demand for some of these buckets. And so the impact on your database is very minimal.
We had one question as well come in, which is to say, could you auto build scenarios based on price? To say, could you change the price in a scenario and rerun forecast, basically, I think is how it would work, to try and drive it that way, which I think definitely you can do, right? Because you can run all of your algorithms on scenarios as well.
That's right. Yep. So if we look at how you run an algorithm, so in this case, we'd be running what's called an SNOP operator. And when you run that, you not only get to select the type of operator, so whether you're looking at a heuristic, which is kind of that push mentality, or the optimizer, which is optimizing your entire supply chain. We'll pick the one that I've been using here. You can not only pick the baseline scenario, but if you had multiple scenarios and you made all the changes at once and you wanted to run them all at once, you could pick all 3 scenarios at once. There's also different versions. Versions gets more into, this is a larger data set, but again, it's, if you want to model, maybe you have a new plant come in, you want to see how that impacts your entire supply chain, that might be a good use case for a version. But again, flexibility is key with IBP. So well, not all the time, but a lot of the times, if you can dream it, IBP can do it. Any more questions there?
Nope, keep going.
All right. So in this case, again, we're having this increased demand. Now, let's say, this view that we were showing before isn't quite as helpful now. So what we can do is we can remove some of the attributes up here. And now let's look at the baseline versus the increased demand. Okay. So what I'm going to show you here is in green, that's our baseline, and that's total. That's not per product or anything like that. And then on the blue line, we're going to see that increased demand. So indeed, there is an uptick in demand in our new scenario. Now we can really drill in and say, all right, let me see what it looks like between baseline and increased demand just for that N95 and those face masks. So it's simply clicking into these areas, hitting the plus button up here, and now the filter is applied to your visual, and now you can see the huge gap between our scenarios and how it's pretty much specifically geared toward those kind of the mask type PPEs. So this is some nice kind of native functionality of the IBP add-in that you can customize a lot of this, but a lot of it you can also just kind of play with right out of the box as well, which is nice. Right, so now kind of following what we did before, let's take a look now at the capacity tab and see what's going on with our network now that we have that huge spike in demand. So before we were looking at just that baseline. So now let's take a look at not only the capacity utilization, but let's look at the increased demand scenario and see what's happening with our resource utilization. If you remember beforehand, right around calendar week 19 is when the utilization for our Chicago plant started dropping off, because again, Chicago is more expensive. So if Optimizer is able to build ahead on some cheaper machines, it will do that. However, now that we have such a big increase in demand in the short term, Optimizer can't build ahead for the demand. So it's forced to utilize all the resources that it has available to it. So you can really see for this particular optimization run, we ran it out to calendar week 26. So really all the way out until the 24th, it's at max capacity, as you can see down here. Whereas in the baseline scenario, out in calendar week 19, we start using less and less of this more expensive resource. Additionally, what we have and what you can see is some of these customer receipts as well. So again, customer receipts is kind of, that's what's coming from the DCs to the customer. So it's what we're supplying to the customer, just a different way of looking at it. And what we can see here, I remove this. For customer receipts, you're going to see that there is going to be an increase in customer receipts as opposed to baseline, which is good. That means, given our current setup, we're actually meeting quite a bit of the demand. Now, where are we falling short? if we're able to still meet a lot of the customer demand, something's got to give somewhere, right? So let's take a look at the inventory tab now. All right, and if you remember before, and we can just quickly look at that if you would like, the baseline for the inventory, we were able to get back up to our target inventory right around calendar week 18. Not so bad. But now let's take a look at what happens with that increased demand, what happens to our projected stock. As you can see, we're not now meeting our target goals until way out in calendar week 24, 25. Okay. So that means our average stock values are going to be going down, as you can see they do. At one point they even go to 0 in our Boston DC, right? And then very slowly after that peak in demand, which kind of ends around calendar week 18, then our resources are able to build back up to those target stocks. And this is all how you set up the data in IBP. So because of the importance of these PPE devices, especially currently, you have what are called kind of these cost inputs. And right now what we're saying is it is more costly to short a customer than it is to miss our inventory targets, right? And that's pretty much how you would do it in most cases, especially in the case of hospital supplies and some of these kind of life or death products. Right? But the nice piece about this is you can see IBP is showing you how your entire supply chain is being impacted by this massive increase. And you can see the actual dollar values associated with that. Now, for this particular piece, what we're now going to tack on is, great, we have a huge influx of demand, especially for our respiratory N95 and face masks. What happens now if our San Jose plant has a case of the coronavirus and we have to shut it down for 5 weeks? How do you model that? Well, again, very easy in IBP. So let's go to this capacity tab and take a look. Now, one of the what's called a key figure is the capacity supply. And this is indicating, in this case, how much supply can a particular resource give over the course of a calendar week. So what we want to do is we want to take this down to 0. Again, it's very easy. Highlight when you want to take it down, and you hit delete. Now in this case, I've already got it run on the back end, so you don't have to watch me run Optimizer, which actually only takes a few minutes, but every minute counts. So what we'll do is I'm just going to pull in another scenario.
And one thing that's nice about this too, while you're doing that, Kyle, is you can either sort of build these scenarios on each other, create a scenario from a scenario, or you can create multiple parallel options to say, well, we can do A or B or C, and then do sort of parallel decision-making process or iterative, either way. It's completely user-driven and flexible, and like he's shown right now, available in real time.
And that's kind of a little bit what I did on this particular scenario where we take 1310 down for 5 weeks. I wanted to keep the same demand that we were seeing in our increased demand scenario, but I just wanted to change a few other things. So what I did was I created the 1310 scenario based off of our increased demand scenario. So yeah, you can build on top of some of these, which is really kind of nice. It helps you from having to do a lot of duplicate work. So in this case, what we see here is now we have 0 capacity supply for these weeks. Now, what is that going to do to the supply chain? Well, once again, we go in and we run an S&OP operator, and we're going to run the same optimization. Now, what Optimizer is going to do is it's going to look at, again, the huge influx of demand. Can you pre-build? In this case, can't really pre-build because we have so much of that demand happening, next week. And then it's going to start looking at, all right, do I have more capacity in the current week? Well, we already know we're maxed out in that increased demand scenario. So, the next option most likely is we're going to have to short customers. Now, in this case, luckily, what we have set up is for our Chicago plant, we have another supplier that is able to supplement any demand when our own resources can't handle the load. Right? So what we'll show you here is, again, if we're looking at the capacity utilization for instead of increased demand, let's take this out and let's look at that 1310 scenario. And what you're going to see is, all right, here we go. We've got a little bit of a noticeable difference here. That middle greenish, what is that, exorcism green, that is now gone, meaning that, okay, oh no, San Jose is down, right? All the others are maxed out. You can see even when San Jose comes back up, it's maxed out for the foreseeable future. So what that means now is we have an option for our Chicago plant to procure from an external supplier. Now, in most cases, we don't want to do that because it's very expensive. But because we're so adamant about meeting customer demand in this case for the personal protection equipment, it makes sense then, even though it's going to cost us more, to be sure that we're providing these products that the customers need. So we can take a look at what's called the external receipts tab here.
And this is where you would model things. In some industries, you'd call it a co-packer, subcontractor. In this case, you're sort of buying on the spot market from an external vendor. There's a lot of different ways that you can use this depending on your business model. In this case, it's a very expensive sourcing option that Kyle's enabled.
That's right. You can see we've only got it set up for the Chicago plant, but what you can tell now is that even though we had the option to source in the baseline, we didn't get any external procurement in the baseline, and that's because our own resources were able to handle the demand. But in this rare case where we actually have enough demand and one of our resources is down that we can't handle it all, what you see the optimizer is choosing to do is it's saying, okay, it's more valuable right now for me to actually supply to my customers. Now let's go find where we can get those products. So it's going to indicate how much it needs to source from this external location. Now, what you can do and what we've modeled here is you can actually put a max on that. So if you don't put a max, Optimizer will just treat it as whatever I need, I can get. But that's not really realistic. So what we have here is a max set. Now, think about how you would do this without IBP. How do you determine what are the maximum external receipts you can get? Well, if you already have a contract with this vendor, you're going to have to either call them up, you're going to have to send them an email, some sort of chain back and forth, and it's really up to you to try to push when the data is updated. However, there's some nice kind of out-of-the-box functionality with IBP that actually would allow you to give the vendor itself access to the database and in only very specific cases, and they can update the information directly themselves, and you can see it in real time. So what we're going to show you here is an instance where we give the vendor access, and they're going to take down maybe their receipts. Maybe in week 15, they're not able to actually produce 5,000 for us, they can only do 2,500. So if we go over into a different view here, and we look at what is called a web-based planning view, and this is the Fiori tile web UI for IBP. We click in here, you can actually provide a direct link to your suppliers, and they would be able to come in and only for the products, only for the locations that you specify for them, and they'd actually be able to enter the data directly themselves through here. So you don't have to send them a spreadsheet and have them send it back. They can enter the information, and then you can see it in real time. So I'll just show you that.
This is a huge advantage, by the way, just to point this out. For those that are used to other planning systems, this was require like very heavy integration software before, where right now it's just part of the web. So just by sending them a web link and an email, they can come in and a vendor or a customer or any sort of raw material supplier, even plants that are not on IBP, still have access to that information in real time. This is, because it's cloud-based and this planning view is web-based, it's incredibly powerful for any sort of external partner or casual user to collaborate with you in real time. This is a big game changer in the planning space for SAP.
And it's easy to use. It looks like a spreadsheet. You're showing the location. Now in this case, I'm showing the location ID and product ID. You can add in the description, the product description, as much information as is helpful to the supplier. And they can come in and let's say now for in this instance, they can only supply 2,500. When they go to actually, hold on 1 second, I need to refresh my screen. When they come in to update the data and they save, what you'll see is they save it here. Who knows where they're located, but as the supply planner, I can come in now and I can look at my data, refresh it, and what we should see here is that changes. So you can kind of see the power of this. It's subtle, but it's real for anybody that's used to dealing with multiple vendors. Maybe you just have a scheduled email reminder set up to vendors that just pumps it out saying, hey, please be sure to update your maximum external receipts or anything like that. It's pretty easy, and now you can see the benefit of you as the planner having real-time or near real-time data. So that's the external receipt piece. Now, if you recall, we're looking at.
Real quick, Kyle, we had a question on the security thing. Is the web-based planning, can it be used for identity and access management? And so the answer there is yes. You can set up, when you create those data views, you can create whichever data view you specifically want and then assign that to a role. So it can be very specific in terms of what you can and cannot see. It's a little different security than the main IBP security, accessing these views. But what it, in practical purposes, allows you to do is to create a vendor-specific view and assign that to a vendor-specific user or supplier or customer and manage it that way. So you can make sure that they're restricted only to what they are allowed to see.
And in this case, I have it restricted very much down to the location and the product, but I also gave this particular view access to different scenarios, whereas, maybe you just have a vendor-specific scenario, or maybe you want them to see multiple locations because they're actually supplying to multiple locations. So for this purpose, it was just a Chicago plant that we're giving them access to. All right, so if we then look back at kind of what we're doing here is 1310 went down, we still have that huge increase in demand. So what's now happening with our customer receipts? So what are we actually giving to the customer? And what you're gonna find now is if we look at the increased demand versus baseline, which we saw before, we were meeting that demand. Now, if we add in that 1310 scenario, where even though the 1310 resource went down in San Jose, we were able to supplant that with our outside vendor because, again, we care most about supplying to our customers at this point. Okay? So you can see we're actually able to supply more because of our contract with our vendor. But you can see how you could tweak this. You could easily say, okay, well, what would happen then if my supplier all of a sudden dropped off and could only provide 20% of what they said before? Well, that's really easy to do. You just go straight back to the external receipts. You take this down yourself, down to 1,000, and then you rerun, and there's your new plan or your new option for a plan. What you'll find, though, is that the customer receipts will drop, And then you start having to have the discussion of, how do we message this appropriately? So then kind of one of the other pieces that I just want to show now, since we have this 1310 down, is this transportation tab. So because of how the optimizer works, it's not just going, it's not just planning one node or one path wherever you change the data. It's rerunning your entire network. And it's then making decisions saying, okay, this for the whole network, this is what's going to happen. So in this case, let's take a look at baseline in 1310. So if we look at the San Jose plant and the transport receipts that are coming out of that plant to Boston, let's look at it in calendar week 13 through 17, right? So in the baseline scenario, it's supplying about 5,500 transport receipts. That's across all the products that it's supplying. Well, what happens in the instance where that plant went down? Well, it makes sense then that, here we go, it's only able to provide 2 at the very beginning, and that's probably just because of maybe a little bit of leftover stock. Now, that has to go somewhere, because we saw in customer receipts before that, in the 1310 scenario, we were actually able to deliver more to the customers. And so you have to start looking, well, where else can customers get product from? And specifically, where can the DCs get products from? Well, let's look at the Chicago plant. And that baseline, for the same time frame, it was providing about 13,400 units to the Boston location. Well, that's because the other amount was coming from San Jose. But in that instance where San Jose went down, now you can see Chicago is supplying over 19,000 units. So you can see how Optimizer is actually shifting, your whole network around based on the constraints that you supply to it.
And this is a real practical example of that interconnectivity I referenced earlier, right? You're not evaluating these things in a vacuum. Everybody is looking at that plan from the capability they need. So from Kyle's demonstration, well, what happens when we turn on an external provider? Just by running it once, as you saw here, everybody from transportation to storage to customer service to production has every information they need at their fingertips. Really powerful stuff. One question popped up, Kyle, on can you give different customers different penalties so that the available supply is shared by an optimizer?
Yes. Yep. You can provide different non-delivery costs. I believe it's per customer per product.
Right, product customer level. So we have about 10 minutes left. Kyle, you want to show some of the financial implications and dashboards, and we'll open up for questions?
Yep, absolutely. So then the last piece of this, and we'll just kind of touch on it briefly, but it is very impactful, is the finance side of it. And because of how the data is stored, you're looking at the price to produce individual products on individual machines, how much it costs to transport data or PPE. It all then ties into, very quickly, you can see at a quarterly, weekly, yearly level what that impact is per scenario. So no longer are you having to recalculate everything by hand when you just come up with, what happens if I take 1310 down and now all of a sudden I have to source from a supplier who is 10 times more expensive than my normal plant is. Now it occurs automatically. So some of these things, it depends on how you look at them. Right now, most of our scenario was in Q1, but we're towards the end of Q1. So the first portion of the year is also wrapped up in here as well. But what you might see, or depending, is sure we were able to meet the customer demand. So maybe our revenue is up, and maybe our profit is up as well because we had such high volumes. But maybe the margin is actually a little bit lower than what we would have had, for like the baseline, for example. So all of this stuff you can dig into. You can change up the key figures as well to match kind of what you need to report on. But it's very easy to see, and changing these views also are extremely easy. You simply are just looking at a simple configuration of the planning view. By, instead of taking it from quarter, let's look at it on the monthly level. And let's say we'll start with this month, kind of go out let's just take a look at it for the next 7 periods. And then it's as easy as just running it this way. And this is, any user can do this. And the nice piece about this as well is maybe one person likes to view it this way, another person likes to view it a different way. You can create templates that give you the base functionality, and then you can save this as a favorite. So I have this particular view saved as a favorite for me, and maybe maybe Mike would save a slightly different variation for himself. You can come back to this every day and not have to constantly rework the view to get it back to the way you like to work. Right, and then the last piece I'm going to show you here, just very briefly, is this is all great for those that like to really dig into the numbers and are kind of the supply planner level. But what about those people maybe that just want to kind of get a brief glance at how things are going, maybe the higher level manager or something, or you have a general reporting that has to occur? What we have are it's called dashboards, and dashboards are comprised of different analytics or different charts. And what we have here is just a subset of analytics that we have for our Managing Chaos webinar. So at a glance, someone could come into this dashboard and just see, okay, what are my target versus protected stocks looking like for the next 3 weeks? They can very quickly see that, okay, for each of the different products, we're not looking so hot over the next 3 weeks. Well, okay, what's causing some of this? Well, you can come over here and say, okay, what's looking at the consensus demand for the next 2 weeks? Oh, we're getting hit heavy on the N95 respirator. All right, so what does that mean? Well, I know I've got an external procurement for that particular one, and I know that they're at 5,000 usually. Right now, we're projected to meet that 5,000 external procurement for the next 3 weeks. Maybe I need to go contact that vendor to see if we can up that, or maybe I need to search out quickly another possible source for this this highly demanded product. There's drill down options available here. You can have alerts set up as well. So it's very flexible, and it's just here to give you the information you need so you can make better decisions.
Awesome, Kyle. So if you go back to the slide deck real quick, I think we'll just kind of recap what we showed. So again, we showed both impacts on the customer, on the demand and the supply element, and how quickly you can evaluate that from every angle of your supply chain. Again, that integrated business planning, or IBP, is not to be taken lightly. So very cool the way it can show you impacts up, down, and sideways. It really becomes the tool you use in the meeting to make those decisions and make them with confidence. And Kyle did a great job showing that scenario capability, both in multiple different ways when disruption happens. And again, we're seeing a world where that's more common in the global supply chain, where that's tariffs, hurricanes, earthquakes,
global pandemics.
I mean, we just talked to somebody over in Tennessee that was impacted by the tornado that went through there. So it's constantly changing and evolving, and these interconnectivities mean it gets more and more critical to manage your redundancies at this level. And it's something that we just love because it's such, we don't love the pain of it. We love the tool, the way it can solve these problems for you in a real interconnected way. It gives you answers that were just never before possible, and value that was never before possible. Supply chain becomes more and more a key component of everybody's organization. So with that, you can see our info up there. You can also email us at info@scmconnections.com with any questions. We also have a YouTube channel where we're going to post this, and we'll email everybody as well. That will have not just this video, but also many other videos and demonstrations of all the functionality that these tools have. Please subscribe and use that as your own resource to do some research and investigation on your own. Again, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear for future topics for webinars as well. If there's anything anybody has particular need for or desire to see, happy to show as much as we can and make these more regular as in-person greetings become less and less frequent. So with that, I think everybody asked their questions along the way. Kyle, awesome job. Appreciate all the effort you put into this. And thanks everybody for attending. Thanks,
Yep.
Christy, for your personal story on this.
Always wash your hands and stay safe out there, friends.
Thanks, Mom. All right. Bye, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.